The Montana winter of 1878 had finally released its icy grip on Pine Ridge Valley, leaving behind a landscape transformed by spring's gentle touch. But as the stagecoach rolled past newly greened meadows, the woman inside clutched her worn leather journal as if it contained her very soul. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Emma Hayes had traveled over 2,000 miles with little more than hope and a marriage contract, only to discover that fate had prepared a cruel twist. She wasn't what Pine Ridge Valley expected, and now her carefully planned future hung by a thread thinner than the page of her letter of introduction. When the Cooper family's only son had advertised for a refined Eastern bride to bring culture to their frontier mansion, Emma had seen her chance to escape Boston's suffocating society. Her detailed correspondence had impressed George Cooper. Her knowledge of literature, her educated opinions, her family's former standing. What her letters hadn't revealed was her untamable spirit, her preference for trousers during horseback riding, or her scandalous ideas about a woman's right to speak her mind. "Absolutely unsuitable," Mrs. Agatha Cooper had declared within an hour of Emma's arrival, her pinched face flushed with indignation. "No son of mine will marry a woman who discusses politics at dinner and arrives with mud on her skirts." Now, as the stagecoach lurched to a stop before Pine Ridge Valley's only hotel, Emma steeled herself for what came next. With her intended marriage dissolved, but her return fare non-existent, she faced the reality of being stranded in a frontier town where respectable women had exactly two paths: marriage or invisible spinsterhood. Neither would cage her spirit without a fight. What Emma couldn't possibly know was that her arrival had been witnessed by someone else, someone who saw not a failed bride, but a kindred spirit. From the shadows of the livery stable across the street, Matthew Blackwood observed the proud set of her shoulders as she stepped down alone. Raised until age 12 in a Lakota camp before returning to his father's world, Matthew recognized something in her stance that few in Pine Ridge Valley would understand: the heart of someone caught between worlds, belonging fully to neither. The Golden Eagle Hotel had seen better days, but it remained the only establishment in Pine Ridge Valley where a single woman could rent a room without inviting complete ruination of her reputation. As Emma signed the guest ledger, the proprietor's wife, Mrs. Jenkins, made little effort to hide her curiosity. "Cooper boy rejected you right quick, didn't he?" she remarked, sliding a heavy iron key across the counter. "Can't say I'm surprised." Agatha Cooper measures potential daughters-in-law against standards the angels themselves would struggle to meet. Emma's spine stiffened. "Mrs. Cooper and I had a difference of opinion regarding what constitutes a suitable wife." "A difference of opinion," Mrs. Jenkins cackled. "That's putting it mildly from what I heard. They're saying you argued science with the doctor and questioned Reverend Phillips about scripture in the same afternoon." "I merely suggested that Genesis might be interpreted as metaphorical rather than literal," Emma replied, her voice steady despite her fatigue. "And Dr. Hayes seemed quite interested in my observations about the medicinal properties of plants I studied in my father's greenhouse." Mrs. Jenkins shook her head, though her eyes held a glimmer of reluctant admiration. "Well, you've certainly made an impression. Question is, what do you plan to do now? Pine Ridge doesn't offer many opportunities for a woman alone." It was the question Emma had been turning over in her mind during the long, silent ride from the Cooper estate. She had exactly $28 to her name, clothing suitable for a prospective bride rather than a working woman, and skills that society deemed ornamental rather than practical. "I intend to find employment," Emma stated with more confidence than she felt. "I'm well educated. I can read Greek and Latin, play the pianoforte, and have extensive knowledge of botanical science." Mrs. Jenkins' expression conveyed exactly how valuable those accomplishments were on the Montana frontier. "Town's got no use for Greek or fancy piano playing, Miss Hayes, but we are in desperate need of a teacher since Miss Fairchild eloped with that cattle buyer last month. Pays room and board plus $15 monthly." A teacher. Emma's heart lifted slightly. Her father, Professor William Hayes of Boston University, had ensured his daughter received an education equal to any man's, despite society's objections. Before financial ruin and influenza had claimed both her parents within a single winter, leaving her with debts that consumed what little inheritance remained. "I would be grateful for an introduction to the school board," Emma said carefully. "That'd be Harold Whitman primarily," Mrs. Jenkins replied, lowering her voice. "He owns half the businesses in town, including the bank. But fair warning, Whitman and the Coopers are thick as thieves. If Agatha Cooper has decided your trouble, you'll not find an easy path." Emma's jaw tightened. "I've never expected an easy path, Mrs. Jenkins, merely a fair opportunity." With her meager belongings settled in a small, clean room on the hotel's second floor, Emma ventured out to acquaint herself with Pine Ridge Valley. The town stretched along a single main street, with businesses lining both sides. General Mercantile, Assayer's Office, Land Registry, Saloon, and Church forming the heart of the community. Beyond these, modest homes gave way to scattered farms, and ranches spreading into the valley carved by Wolf Creek. At the far end of town stood the schoolhouse, a simple white clapboard building with a bell tower that seemed to tilt slightly to the east. Emma found herself drawn toward it, imagining herself bringing knowledge to frontier children. She was so absorbed in these thoughts that she failed to notice the rider approaching until his horse stopped directly in her path. "You must be the mail-order bride who set Agatha Cooper's tongue wagging." The man's voice carried a note of amusement. "Word travels fast in Pine Ridge." Emma looked up, shielding her eyes against the late afternoon sun. The rider sat tall in his saddle, broad-shouldered, and sun-darkened. Unlike the other men she'd encountered in town, his clothing combined elements of both worlds: fringed buckskin jacket over a conventional shirt, beaded moccasins rather than boots. Most striking were his eyes, pale blue against his bronzed skin, watching her with undisguised interest. "I prefer Miss Emma Hayes to mail-order bride," she replied evenly. "And yes, it seems my failure to meet Mrs. Cooper's exacting standards has become common knowledge." The man swung down from his horse with a fluid grace that spoke of a lifetime in the saddle. "Matthew Blackwood," he introduced himself with a slight nod. "And if you've earned Agatha Cooper's disapproval, I'd count that as a point in your favor." There was something in his manner, a directness untempered by the usual social niceties, that both surprised and refreshed Emma after Boston's suffocating propriety. "You're not concerned about being seen conversing with a woman of questionable standing, Mr. Blackwood?" A smile touched the corner of his mouth. "Miss Hayes, I've been Pine Ridge's most questionable resident since I returned from living with my mother's people 15 years ago. The Lakota taught me to value a person's spirit over their social position." The Lakota. Emma couldn't hide her interest. Her father had collected scholarly works about indigenous peoples, and she had devoured them in secret, fascinated by cultures that seemed to offer women more meaningful roles than endless rounds of social calls and needlework. "My mother was Lakota," Matthew explained. "When she died, my father brought me back to his world. Though some in town would say I never fully returned." His gaze was assessing but not unkind. "You're looking at the schoolhouse. Are you hoping to become our new teacher?" "If the school board will have me," Emma acknowledged. "Though I'm told Mr. Whitman makes such decisions, and he's closely aligned with the Coopers." Matthew's expression darkened slightly. "Harold Whitman has been trying to buy my ranch for years. He controls most everything else in this valley." He gestured toward the schoolhouse. "Come, I'll walk with you. The building needs inspection. Anyway, I'm on the maintenance committee." As they approached the schoolhouse, Emma noticed details that had been invisible from a distance. A sagging porch step, windows that needed reglazing, desks that had seen decades of use. Yet there was something undeniably hopeful about the space, with children's drawings still pinned to the walls and shelves lined with well-worn books. "It's not much compared to Eastern schools," Matthew commented, watching her reaction. "It's wonderful," Emma replied sincerely, "a place of possibility. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story." Matthew studied her with new interest. "You genuinely mean that? Education transformed my life, Mr. Blackwood. It can do the same for these children." Emma ran her fingers along a student's careful penmanship practice. "My father believed knowledge was the great equalizer, that it could transcend the circumstances of one's birth or gender." "Your father sounds like an unusual man." "He was." Emma swallowed against the sudden tightness in her throat. "He taught at Boston University. When other professors brought their sons to observe lectures, he brought me. When influenza took him and my mother last year, it felt as though all doors closed simultaneously." Matthew was silent for a moment. "So you came west, not just for marriage, but for opportunity?" "Yes." Emma looked up, meeting his gaze directly. "Is that so difficult to understand?" "Not to me," he replied quietly. "But Harold Whitman sees education mainly as a way to create obedient workers for his enterprises, and Mrs. Cooper views it as a means of instilling proper social behavior." He gestured to a bookshelf where titles had been carefully arranged. "Notice anything missing?" Emma scanned the collection. Basic primers, arithmetic texts, a Bible, approved histories of America's founding. Science texts, she realized. Natural philosophy, astronomy, advanced mathematics. Precisely. Whitman claims such subjects are impractical for frontier children who will become farmers and shopkeepers. Matthew's voice carried a controlled frustration. "I've been trying to expand the curriculum for years with little success." Emma felt a spark of purpose ignite within her. Perhaps that could change. Before Matthew could respond, the schoolhouse door opened to reveal a slender, careworn woman in her 30s, a basket of supplies in her arms. She stopped short at the sight of them. "Matthew, I didn't expect—" Her eyes widened as they fell on Emma. "Oh, you must be Miss Hayes. News travels quickly here." "Kate Miller," Matthew explained. "Our previous teacher's assistant, now serving as temporary instructor until a replacement is found." "Temporary and wholly inadequate," Kate corrected with a self-deprecating smile. "I have only an 8th grade education myself. The older students have nearly exhausted my knowledge already." Emma stepped forward. "I would be interested in applying for the position, Miss Miller. I have a comprehensive education in classics, mathematics, natural sciences, and literature." Kate's face brightened. "Immediately, that would be wonderful. The children deserve someone who can truly guide their learning." She hesitated, glancing at Matthew, "though Mr. Whitman makes the final decision, with input from the Coopers, of course." "Of course," Emma echoed, her determination growing with each revelation of the town's power structure. As they left the schoolhouse, the setting sun cast long shadows across the dusty street. Matthew walked beside Emma in companionable silence for several moments before speaking. "Whitman controls the school board, but he listens to public opinion when it suits his interests. If enough parents support your appointment, he might overrule Agatha Cooper's inevitable objections." Emma considered this. "And how does one gain the support of parents in Pine Ridge Valley?" "You could start tomorrow," Matthew suggested. Sunday service. Everyone attends, even those who live miles out. It would give you a chance to meet the families. The prospect of facing the entire community, including the Coopers, sent a flutter of anxiety through Emma's chest. But what alternative did she have? "I'll be there," she decided. Matthew nodded approvingly. "I'll introduce you to some people who won't be swayed by Agatha's opinions. Robert Jensen, he's the blacksmith, half Lakota himself. Sarah Williams at the general store. They have influence with the working families." As they neared the hotel, Emma felt a curious reluctance to end their conversation. Matthew Blackwood represented something she hadn't expected to find in Pine Ridge Valley. An ally who seemed to value precisely the qualities that had made her unsuitable in Agatha Cooper's eyes. "Thank you for your assistance today, Mr. Blackwood," she said formally, conscious suddenly of curious eyes watching from the hotel porch. Matthew touched the brim of his hat in acknowledgement, but his eyes held something more complex than simple courtesy. "You came west seeking one opportunity, Miss Hayes. Perhaps losing it will lead you to something more meaningful." With that cryptic observation, he returned to his horse and mounted with the same effortless grace. Emma watched him ride away, her mind already turning over possibilities. If Pine Ridge Valley's children needed a teacher who valued true education over social conformity, perhaps her misfortune with the Coopers had been providence in disguise. That evening, as Emma prepared for bed in her small hotel room, a knock at her door revealed Mrs. Jenkins bearing a covered tray. "Brought you some supper," the hotel keeper explained, setting the tray on a small table, "and some information you might find useful." Emma thanked her for the simple but hearty meal of stew and biscuits. "What information?" Mrs. Jenkins settled herself uninvited in the room's only chair. "I saw you walking with Matthew Blackwood today. Folks will talk. People seem determined to talk about me regardless of what I do," Emma observed dryly. "True enough, but you should understand Matthew's position here. The Blackwood Ranch is the last major property in this valley that Harold Whitman doesn't control, directly or indirectly. Matthew's father was one of the first settlers, established water rights before anyone else." Mrs. Jenkins leaned forward. "Whitman wants those water rights desperately. The railroad's coming through next year, and whoever controls the water will decide where the station goes." Emma absorbed this, seeing new dimensions to the power dynamics Matthew had hinted at. And the Coopers? Harold Whitman practically handpicked George Cooper as his successor. That's why he supported bringing in an Eastern bride, wanted to elevate the family's standing before George takes over the bank. Mrs. Jenkins fixed Emma with a significant look. "So when you turned out to be independent-minded instead of properly decorative, you upset plans years in the making." The implications settled over Emma like a weight. Her unsuitability wasn't merely about social propriety. It threatened carefully laid plans for Pine Ridge Valley's future. No wonder Agatha Cooper had reacted so strongly. "I see," Emma said quietly. "Thank you for telling me." Mrs. Jenkins rose to leave, but paused at the door. "One more thing. Matthew Blackwood might seem like just a rancher, but his mother's people gave him knowledge most folks here don't understand. The Lakota called him Wichapi Wangyanka, stargazer, for his habit of studying the night skies. He's educated. In his own right, learned mathematics and scientific farming back east. Whitman hates that most of all. A man who straddles both worlds and excels in each." After Mrs. Jenkins departed, Emma stood at her window, gazing toward the mountains silhouetted against the night sky. Stargazer. She thought of the books missing from the schoolhouse shelves. Astronomy, natural philosophy, advanced mathematics. The very subjects her father had insisted were essential to understanding the world. For the first time since arriving in Pine Ridge Valley, Emma felt the stirring of something beyond mere survival. Perhaps Matthew was right. perhaps losing. One opportunity would lead to something more meaningful. If Harold Whitman and Agatha Cooper expected her to shrink away in defeat, they would soon discover just how mistaken they were. Sunday morning dawned clear and bright, the kind of pristine spring day that made Pine Ridge Valley's natural beauty impossible to ignore. Emma dressed with deliberate care in her most conservative gown, navy blue with a modest collar and minimal trim. Her one concession to personal preference was pinning a small silver microscope charm, her father's graduation gift, to her collar rather than a conventional brooch. The church bell was ringing as Emma approached the white-clappered building. At the center of town, families streamed toward the entrance, the women in their Sunday best, men with hair slicked down, and children scrubbed to uncomfortable shininess. Emma felt their curious gazes as she climbed the steps alone. Inside, she hesitated in the vestibule, suddenly aware of the social complexities of where to sit. In Boston, a newcomer would wait to be invited by an established family. Here, the rules were less clear. Miss Hayes. Sarah Williams, the shopkeeper Matthew had mentioned, appeared at her elbow. A plump, practical-looking woman in her 40s, she had intelligent eyes that missed nothing. "Come sit with us. My brother Robert Jensen and I save a pew near the back." Grateful, Emma followed her to where a powerfully built man waited. Robert Jensen's mixed heritage was evident in his features, though unlike Matthew, he dressed completely, in the European style, with no visible nod to his indigenous background. "The blacksmith," he introduced himself with a firm handshake that defied social convention. "Matthew mentioned you're interested in the teaching position." Before Emma could respond, a ripple of heightened attention swept through the church. Harold Whitman had arrived, flanked by the Cooper family. Emma had not yet met the man who effectively controlled Pine Ridge Valley, but his identity was unmistakable. Tall and corpulent, with a silver watch chain stretched across his substantial middle, Whitman carried himself with the absolute confidence of someone unaccustomed to opposition. Beside him, Agatha Cooper walked with pinched dignity, while her son George, Emma's rejected intended, followed looking distinctly uncomfortable. Emma had barely exchanged a dozen sentences with the young man before his mother had declared the match impossible. George had offered no objection to his mother's pronouncement. As the Coopers and Whitman took their customary front pew, Agatha's gaze swept the congregation and locked briefly on Emma. The older woman's mouth tightened disapprovingly before she deliberately turned away. "Well, you've certainly made an impression on the town matriarch," Sarah murmured. "That's quite an achievement for less than 2 days' residence." "I expressed unconventional opinions," Emma replied quietly as they sat, apparently questioning whether women might someday be permitted to vote constitutes dangerous radicalism. Robert's deep chuckle rumbled beside her. "In Agatha Cooper's world, suggesting women have thoughts at all borders on sedition." Emma's response was interrupted by Reverend Philip's arrival at the pulpit. The sermon that followed struck Emma as deliberately crafted to reinforce social hierarchies, heavy emphasis on obedience to authority, knowing one's place, and the virtues of accepting divine providence without question. As the service concluded, and the congregation moved outside for the customary post-worship socializing, Emma found herself the unmistakable object of community curiosity. Parents with school-aged children studied her with particular interest, clearly aware of her potential role in their children's education. "Miss Hayes," a warm voice drew her attention. Kate Miller approached with a small group of children. "These students were hoping to meet you." 5 children, ranging from about 8 to 14 years old, regarded Emma with undisguised curiosity. A girl of perhaps 12, with intelligent eyes and a serious expression, stepped forward. "Are you really going to be our new teacher?" Tommy Bennett says his ma says, you know, Greek and astronomy and all kinds of things they don't even teach at the big school in Helena. Emma smiled, crouching slightly to meet the girl at eye level. I would very much like to be your teacher. And yes, I've studied those subjects, along with many others. Could you teach us about the stars? A younger boy piped up. Mr. Blackwood showed us his telescope once, but Miss Fairchild said astronomy wasn't in the curriculum. What's your name? Emma asked. Daniel. Daniel Miller. The boy gestured to Kate. She's my aunt. Well, Daniel, I believe understanding. The stars and planets is just as important as arithmetic or grammar, Emma replied, conscious of parents listening nearby. The heavens follow mathematical principles that help us comprehend the order of creation. See, Ma, I told you. Daniel turned excitedly to a woman standing nearby, who offered Emma a tentative smile. Similar exchanges followed as more children gravitated toward Emma, drawn by her willingness to engage with their questions directly, rather than dismissing them as childish. Parents watched with expressions ranging from approval to uncertainty to outright suspicion. Emma was so absorbed in these interactions that she didn't immediately notice Harold Whitman's approach until a hush fell over the nearby conversations. The businessman surveyed her with the evaluating eye of someone assessing livestock at auction. Miss Hayes, he said, his voice carrying the practiced heartiness of a politician, I understand you're interested in our teaching position. Emma straightened, meeting his gaze directly. Yes, Mr. Whitman, I believe I could offer the children of Pine Ridge Valley an exceptional education. Exceptional, he repeated, as though testing the word for hidden dangers. Our needs here are quite practical, Miss Hayes. Reading, writing, basic figures, enough scripture to ensure moral development. Nothing excessive. Education should never be merely practical, Mr. Whitman, Emma replied evenly. Children's minds are capable of remarkable growth when properly nourished. Whitman's smile didn't reach his eyes. Progressive ideas may suit Eastern academies, Miss Hayes, but frontier children require preparation for frontier lives. All the more reason they deserve the broadest possible foundation, came a deep voice from behind Emma. Matthew Blackwood had joined them, his tall figure commanding immediate attention. The frontier demands innovation and adaptation, qualities fostered by comprehensive education. The tension between the two men was palpable. Whitman's jovial facade hardened into something closer to his true nature. Always the advocate for impractical knowledge, aren't you, Blackwood? Whitman's tone remained conversational, but carried an undercurrent of long-standing animosity. Not everyone has the luxury of stargazing when there's real work to be done. The railroad engineers use astronomy for surveying, Matthew countered mildly. Seems practical enough. A small crowd had gathered, sensing the confrontation beneath the civil exchange. Emma noticed George Cooper hovering at the edges, looking uncomfortable, while his mother watched with narrow-eyed calculation. Whitman turned back to Emma. The school board meets Tuesday evening, Miss Hayes. You're welcome to present your qualifications then. His tone made it clear what outcome he anticipated, though I should mention we're considering several candidates. It was a transparent lie. Pine Ridge Valley was desperate for a teacher, but Emma merely nodded. I look forward to discussing my approach to education with the board. As Whitman moved away, Matthew leaned closer. You've made an impression on the families, he observed quietly. Several mothers have already approached me expressing support. Will it be enough to counter Mr. Whitman's obvious objections? Emma asked. Perhaps not alone, Matthew acknowledged, but you have other advantages you haven't yet deployed. Before Emma could ask what he meant, they were interrupted by Sarah Williams. Miss Hayes, I'm hosting a ladies' sewing circle tomorrow afternoon. Most of the mothers attend. It would be an excellent opportunity for you to build support. Emma recognized the strategic value immediately. I would be delighted to attend. As the church gathering dispersed, Emma found herself walking back toward town alongside Matthew, Sarah, and Robert. For the first time since arriving in Pine Ridge Valley, she felt something beyond the isolation that had followed her rejection by the Coopers. These people, outsiders in their own ways, saw value in precisely the qualities that others deemed problematic. Whitman was rattled, Robert observed as they walked. He's not accustomed to public contradiction, especially from a woman. He'll push the school board to reject your application, Sarah added, but he's miscalculated if he thinks that's the end of it. What did you mean about my other advantages? Emma asked Matthew directly. Matthew's expression remained neutral, but his eyes held that same assessing look she'd noticed during their first meeting. Pine Ridge Valley has changed in ways Whitman hasn't fully recognized. The new mining operations and expanded ranching have brought families who want more for their children than basic literacy. They've just lacked someone to articulate that vision. He nodded toward the scattered groups of parents still engaged in conversation. You've given them that voice. Emma considered this. Throughout her life, her intellectual capabilities had been treated as liabilities to be hidden or minimized. The possibility that they might instead become assets, might actually serve a community's needs, was both novel and deeply affirming. Tuesday's board meeting is merely the beginning, Matthew continued. Regardless of their decision, the conversation about education in this valley has already changed because of you. As they reached the hotel, Emma turned to face her new allies. Thank you all for your support. It means more than I can express. Sarah squeezed her hand. Tomorrow's sewing. Circle. 1 o'clock at my home behind the Mercantile. Bring your best arguments and perhaps your most diplomatic phrasing. After they departed, Emma climbed the stairs to her room with a mind awhirl with possibilities. In less than 48 hours, her purpose in Pine Ridge Valley had transformed completely. She had arrived seeking a conventional role as Mrs. George Cooper and found it closed to her. But perhaps the right door had closed so that another, one offering greater purpose, could open. As dusk settled over the valley, Emma sat at her small writing desk and began drafting her presentation for the school board. If Harold Whitman expected a meek supplicant grateful for any consideration, he was about to encounter something entirely different. A woman who had found her true calling, and with it, the courage to challenge a system designed to limit rather than liberate young minds. In the distance, the silhouette of Thunder Mountain stood against the darkening sky, a reminder of the natural grandeur that surrounded this small community. Emma thought of Matthew's Lakota name, Stargazer, and smiled at the synchronicity. Her father had often taken her to his university's observatory, teaching her to see the heavens not as mysterious and unknowable, but as a vast frontier of discovery guided by mathematical precision. Perhaps that was what Matthew had recognized in her from their first meeting. Not just a woman out of place, but a kindred spirit who looked beyond conventional boundaries toward greater possibilities. And perhaps that recognition was worth more than all of Agatha Cooper's approval or Harold Whitman's patronage combined. Emma set down her pen and moved to the window, gazing up at the emerging stars. For the first time since her parents' deaths, she felt the stirring of genuine hope, not merely for survival, but for a life of meaning and purpose. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them with the certainty that she was exactly where she needed to be. Sarah Williams' home behind the Mercantile proved to be a testament to its owner's practical nature. Simple furnishings arranged for comfort rather than show, shelves lined with books rather than decorative plates, and walls adorned with detailed maps of the territory, instead of the sentimental landscapes Emma had observed in other Pine Ridge homes. As Emma entered the parlor where the ladies' sewing circle gathered, conversations hushed momentarily before resuming with deliberate casualness. "Miss Hayes, welcome," Sarah greeted her warmly, taking Emma's shawl. "Let me introduce you properly to everyone." The introductions revealed a cross-section of Pine Ridge Valley's female society, wives of miners, ranchers, and shopkeepers, several with school-aged children. Mrs. Miller, Kate and Daniel's mother, offered Emma a particularly warm smile. Noticeably, absent were Agatha Cooper and the wives of men directly under Harold Whitman's influence. Emma took a seat in the circle, accepting the small embroidery hoop Sarah offered. While her academic father had ensured her education in subjects typically reserved for men, her practical mother had insisted on traditional feminine accomplishments as well. Emma's needlework, though not exceptional, was certainly competent. "We've been discussing the school situation," Mrs. Peterson, the miller's wife, stated bluntly once Emma was settled. "Kate's done her best, but my Jacob hasn't learned a thing in months. Boy's got a mind for figures that needs proper guidance." Emma seized the opening. "I noticed several older students at Sunday service who seemed quite bright. Have they had access to advanced arithmetic or algebra?" "Algebra?" Mrs. Lawrence, a rancher's wife, exclaimed. "Miss Fairchild barely covered long division before she ran off with that cattle buyer." "That's precisely my concern," Emma replied, carefully stitching as she spoke. "Children with aptitude for mathematics need progressive challenges to develop their abilities." "And what good is algebra to a boy who'll spend his life working cattle?" asked Mrs. Henderson, whose husband managed one of Whitman's outlying ranches. Emma met her gaze steadily. "The same good it is to the surveyors laying out the railroad that's coming through next year. The same good it is to the engineers who design irrigation systems that could transform ranching in this valley." She deliberately moderated her tone to conversational rather than confrontational. "Knowledge is never wasted, Mrs. Henderson, even if its application isn't immediately obvious." Mrs. Miller leaned forward. "My Daniel can't stop talking about the stars since Mr. Blackwood showed him that telescope. Says he wants to understand how they move. Is that something you could teach?" "Celestial mechanics involves practical applications of mathematics," Emma confirmed. "Understanding star movements helps with navigation, timekeeping, and tracking seasons for planting." Sarah Williams, observing the growing interest among the mothers, steered the conversation deftly. "What specific subjects would you include that aren't currently taught, Miss Hayes?" Emma set down her embroidery, warming to the topic. "Beyond the fundamentals, I would introduce natural sciences through direct observation, botany, geology, basic physics. History would expand beyond American events to include world civilizations. Literature would involve not just reading, but analysis and composition." She paused, gauging her audience. "And for interested older students, I would offer Latin, which forms the foundation for scientific and legal terminology." "Latin!" Mrs. Henderson scoffed. "Harold Whitman says, my husband paid good money to send our eldest to that boarding school in Helena specifically to learn Latin," Mrs. Lawrence interrupted firmly. "Said any boy looking to become a doctor or lawyer needs it. Now you're saying we could have that education right here?" Emma nodded. "With appropriate resources, yes." The conversation flowed more freely after that, with most mothers expressing enthusiasm for expanded educational opportunities. Even Mrs. Henderson seemed thoughtful rather than dismissive by the end. As they sewed, Emma learned more about Pine Ridge Valley's complex social dynamics, which families aligned with Whitman's interests, which maintained independence, and which struggled on the margins. As the gathering concluded, Sarah detained Emma after the others had departed. "You've won significant support," she observed, pouring tea for them both. "But Whitman won't yield easily, especially after your exchange on Sunday." His control depends on maintaining the status quo. Why does education threaten him so directly? Emma asked, accepting the cup gratefully. Sarah settled into her chair with a sigh. Harold Whitman came here with nothing 20 years ago. Built his empire through land speculation and strategic marriages. His power comes from controlling information. Who knows what land will be valuable, which investments will yield returns? She stirred her tea thoughtfully. Educated citizens ask questions. They verify claims. They calculate interest rates independently. And Matthew Blackwood, Emma asked, trying to keep her tone merely curious. A knowing smile touched Sarah's lips. Matthew represents everything Whitman fears. Independent, knowledgeable, respected by both settlers and Lakota. He can't be bought or intimidated. She leaned forward slightly. Did he tell you about his education? Only that he returned from living with his mother's people when he was 12. After his father brought him back, Matthew struggled to find his place. Too Lakota for white society, too white for the Lakota. His father sent him east to school, hoping it would help him assimilate. Sarah's expression softened with old affection. Instead, he excelled academically while embracing both sides of his heritage, studied scientific agriculture, engineering, astronomy. When he returned, he transformed the Blackwood Ranch using techniques from both worlds. Emma absorbed this. New information, understanding better why Matthew had taken such immediate interest in her situation. He too had navigated between worlds, refusing to accept artificial limitations. The school board meets tomorrow evening, Sarah reminded her. Whitman controls 3 votes directly, his own, Reverend Phillips's, and Dr. Hayes's. You need to sway at least one of them to have any chance. Dr. Hayes. Emma recalled the town physician who had seemed genuinely interested in her botanical knowledge. Is he entirely under Whitman's influence? Whitman holds the mortgage on his practice, Sarah explained. But William Hayes has a scientist's mind. If anyone might be persuaded by educational merit rather than politics, it's him. Emma returned to the hotel with renewed determination and a clearer strategy. Dr. Hayes represented her best hope of dividing Whitman's control of the school board. If she could demonstrate the value of her scientific knowledge persuasively enough, perhaps professional respect might outweigh political expediency. The following morning, Emma presented herself at Dr. Hayes's modest office near the church. The physician looked up from his desk with surprise when his assistant showed her in. Miss Hayes, I wasn't expecting you. Are you unwell? Perfectly well, thank you, Emma assured him. I've come regarding a professional matter. Dr. Hayes gestured to the chair across from his desk, curiosity evident in his expression. Professional. Emma removed a small journal from her bag. My father maintained extensive notes on medicinal botanicals. Given the limited pharmaceutical supplies in frontier communities, I thought these might be of interest. She placed the journal on his desk. Particularly his work on willowbark derivatives for pain relief and fever reduction. The doctor's eyes widened as he opened the journal, recognizing the scientific value immediately. This is remarkably detailed research. Your father was a physician? A professor of natural sciences at Boston University, Emma clarified. We maintained an extensive greenhouse for botanical studies. I assisted with his research for many years. Dr. Hayes flipped through the pages with growing interest. These preparation methods for tinctures, some are completely novel to me. He looked up, studying her with new respect. You understand all this? I implemented most of these processes personally, Emma confirmed. My father believed practical application was essential to true scientific understanding. Fascinating. The doctor continued examining the journal, and you would bring this knowledge to our school curriculum. Adapted appropriately for different ages, yes. Emma explained. Younger children would begin with basic plant identification and classification. Older students could progress to understanding medicinal properties and extraction methods. Dr. Hayes closed the journal reluctantly. Miss Hayes, I appreciate you're sharing this. It's clearly valuable information. His expression grew troubled. However, the school board must consider many factors beyond academic merit when selecting a teacher. Emma met his gaze directly. Including Harold Whitman's financial influence? The doctor flinched slightly but didn't deny it. This community has complex needs and relationships. Indeed. Emma stood, retrieving her journal. I merely thought you, as a scientist, might appreciate that knowledge transcends political considerations. She moved toward the door, then paused. The board meets this evening. I'll leave this journal with my application materials should you wish to review it further. As Emma departed, she felt the physician's troubled gaze following her. She had planted a seed of doubt. Whether it would bear fruit remained to be seen. The remainder of the day passed in preparation for the evening's confrontation. Emma refined her presentation, anticipating objections and crafting responses that balanced confidence with appropriate deference to the board's authority. By late afternoon, she had done everything possible to strengthen her position. She was returning to the hotel when a messenger boy intercepted her. Miss Hayes, Mr. Blackwood asked me to give you this. He handed her a folded note before dashing off. Emma opened it to find a brief message in a strong, clear hand. Visit the schoolhouse before the board meeting. Look behind the teacher's desk. MB intrigued, Emma altered her course toward the schoolhouse. The building stood empty in the late afternoon light, the children long since departed. Emma let herself in, the familiar scent of chalk dust and wood polish stirring memories of her own school days. Behind the teacher's desk, she found what Matthew had intended her to discover, a hidden shelf containing books that were decidedly not part of the approved curriculum. Advanced mathematics texts, astronomy charts, a volume on Lakota medicine practices, geological studies of the Montana Territory, and most surprisingly, a well-worn copy of Mary Wollstonecraft's A Vindication of the Rights of Woman. A separate note had been tucked into this last volume. The previous teacher maintained this secret library for students showing particular promise. Perhaps knowing that Pine Ridge's children have already been exposed to dangerous ideas might influence your approach tonight. MB Emma smiled, understanding the tactical advantage Matthew had provided. The children were already receiving expanded education, just not openly. This knowledge gave her room to position her curriculum as an extension of existing practices, rather than a radical departure. As dusk approached, Emma dressed with strategic care in her most conservative gown, her hair arranged in a simple but dignified style. She gathered her application materials, including her father's botanical journal, and made her way to the town hall where the school board would meet. The meeting room was already crowded when she arrived, far more community members in attendance than typically bothered with school board proceedings, according to Sarah Williams' whispered explanation. Parents from the sewing circle offered encouraging smiles, while others watched with open curiosity. At the front of the room, Harold Whitman presided over the small board consisting of himself, Reverend Phillips, Dr. Hayes, and surprisingly, Robert Jensen, whose presence Emma hadn't anticipated. As a business owner who employs local graduates, I have a vested interest in educational standards, Robert explained quietly when Emma expressed surprise at his role. Whitman couldn't block my appointment without appearing to discriminate based on my heritage. The meeting began with standard administrative matters before turning to the teaching vacancy. Whitman cleared his throat importantly. As you all know, Miss Fairchild's departure has left our school without a permanent instructor. We're fortunate that Miss Miller has stepped in temporarily, but we must secure a qualified replacement. He shuffled papers performatively. "We have one applicant present tonight, Miss Emma Hayes, recently arrived from Boston." Emma rose gracefully as all eyes turned to her. "Thank you for considering my application, gentlemen. I'd be happy to address any questions about my qualifications or educational approach. Perhaps you could begin by summarizing your academic background," Dr. Hayes suggested, his expression carefully neutral, though his eyes held new interest after their morning conversation. For the next several minutes, Emma outlined her extensive education under her father's guidance, her experience assisting with university-level research, and her fluency in classical and modern languages. She presented her vision for Pine Ridge Valley School, rigorous but practical, challenging but accessible to students from diverse backgrounds. "Very impressive credentials," Whitman acknowledged when she finished, his tone suggesting precisely the opposite. "However, Miss Hayes, our concern must be practical education suited to frontier needs. These philosophical approaches you've described seem better suited to Eastern academies than our humble school." "On the contrary, Mr. Whitman," Emma countered respectfully, "frontier communities particularly benefit from comprehensive education. The challenges of developing these territories require innovative thinking and adaptability, qualities fostered by exposure to diverse fields of knowledge." Reverend Phillips leaned forward with a frown. "Miss Hayes, there are concerns about your theological perspectives. Mrs. Cooper mentioned you expressed rather unorthodox views on scriptural interpretation." Emma had anticipated this attack. "I believe Scripture offers multiple levels of insight, Reverend, literary, historical, and spiritual. Exploring these dimensions enriches rather than diminishes faith." She smiled slightly. "Much as St. Augustine and Thomas Aquinas suggested in their own scholarly examinations of biblical texts." The reference to respected theological authorities clearly caught the minister off guard. He had expected a defensive response he could easily dismiss, not a reasoned argument grounded in religious scholarship. "There's also the matter of your personal circumstances," Whitman interjected, changing tactics. "Teaching requires moral authority. Your arrival as a mail-order bride, followed by the dissolution of your engagement, raises questions about stability." A murmur ran through the assembled community members. Emma felt a flush of indignation, but controlled her expression carefully. "I came west seeking opportunity, Mr. Whitman, as did most in this community. That my circumstances changed upon arrival reflects adaptation rather than instability." Her voice remained steady. "As for moral authority, I would hope that's judged by conduct rather than circumstances beyond one's control." Robert Jensen nodded approvingly, while Dr. Hayes appeared increasingly uncomfortable with Whitman's line of attack. Several mothers in the audience exchanged whispers of support. "Well said, Miss Hayes," Dr. Hayes finally interjected. "I've reviewed the botanical research she shared with me earlier today, gentlemen. It's impressive scientific work with practical applications for our community. Such knowledge would be invaluable for our students." Whitman's expression darkened at this unexpected support from his usual ally. "Science has its place, Doctor, but we must consider the complete picture." "If I may," interrupted a deep voice from the back of the room. The crowd parted as Matthew Blackwood stepped forward. "As a community member with significant property holdings and tax contributions, I have an interest in educational quality that affects property values and future development." Whitman's jaw tightened visibly. "This is a board matter, Blackwood." "Public meeting, Harold," Matthew replied mildly. "Community input is customary." He turned to address the board directly. "I've reviewed Miss Hayes' proposed curriculum. It aligns remarkably well with educational standards being implemented in progressive territories that are attracting railroad investment and economic development. This targeted reference to economic consequences, framed in terms of Whitman's own priorities, was masterfully calculated. Several board members straightened with new interest. Furthermore, Matthew continued, the school library already contains most texts necessary to implement this curriculum, requiring minimal additional investment. Emma recognized his strategy immediately. He was revealing that the resources for expanded education already existed, making objections based on cost obsolete. That's simply not true, Reverend Phillips objected. Our library is quite limited to approved. I conducted a full inventory last month as part of my maintenance committee responsibilities, Matthew interrupted smoothly. The complete list is available for board review. Emma suppressed a smile, understanding now why Matthew had shown her the hidden collection. He'd anticipated this very moment when revealing its existence would undermine Whitman's position most effectively. Harold Whitman's face had reddened slightly. Cataloging is one matter, Blackwood. Determining appropriate educational content is the board's purview. Absolutely, Matthew agreed reasonably. Which is why Miss Hayes' balanced approach, combining practical skills with broader knowledge, seems particularly well-suited to our community's diverse needs. The dynamics in the room had shifted palpably. What Whitman had clearly expected to be a straightforward rejection of Emma's application had transformed into a meaningful debate about educational philosophy, with significant community interest and unexpected divisions among his allies. Dr. Hayes cleared his throat. I must say, the scientific curriculum Miss Hayes proposes would give our students advantages few frontier schools offer. And what of traditional values? Whitman demanded, his composure slipping slightly. Progressive education often undermines established social order. Knowledge and values aren't mutually exclusive, Mr. Whitman, Emma responded, recognizing her opportunity. Indeed, true education strengthens moral reasoning by developing critical thinking. My approach would complement rather than contradict the values this community holds dear. From the audience, Mrs. Miller raised her hand. Might we hear from some parents? After all, these are our children being discussed. Whitman hesitated, clearly reluctant to open the floor, but aware that refusing would appear dictatorial. Briefly, he conceded. What followed was a series of increasingly supportive testimonials from parents who had spoken with Emma at the church gathering and sewing circle. Mrs. Lawrence described her inability to afford sending a second son to Helena for advanced education. Mr. Peterson outlined his children's stalled progress under limited curriculum. Most powerfully, Kate Miller spoke of students' visibly diminished enthusiasm as they realized the constraints on their learning. As the testimonials concluded, Whitman attempted to regain control of the proceedings. These perspectives are noted, but ultimately the board must consider all factors, including budgetary constraints and established educational standards. Perhaps a compromise, Dr. Hayes suggested unexpectedly. A probationary appointment for one term, with curriculum review at regular intervals. Robert Jensen immediately seized this opening. Seconded, a practical solution that allows for assessment based on actual results rather than speculation. Whitman found himself outmaneuvered. Opposing a reasonable compromise would appear arbitrary after the community's clear expression of interest. After a tense silence, he forced a tight smile. I propose we take Dr. Hayes' suggestion to a vote. A one-term probationary appointment with monthly curriculum review and final evaluation in December. The vote that followed revealed the impact of the evening's discussion. Dr. Hayes and Robert Jensen voted unequivocally in favor. Reverend Phillips, after visible hesitation, abstained rather than directly opposing his congregation's expressed wishes. Only Whitman himself voted against the compromise. The motion carries, he announced with poorly concealed displeasure. Miss Hayes, you are appointed on a probationary basis beginning Monday next. Regular curriculum reviews will ensure adherence to community standards. The thinly veiled warning in his last statement wasn't lost on Emma, but she merely nodded. Graciously, thank you, gentlemen. I look forward to serving Pine Ridge Valley's children. As the meeting adjourned, community members surrounded Emma with congratulations and questions about her plans. Through the crowd, she caught Matthew's eye. He offered a slight nod of acknowledgement, not celebrating prematurely, but recognizing this first victory in what they both knew would be a prolonged campaign. Later, as Emma walked back to the hotel accompanied by Sarah and Robert, the full significance of the evening's events began to sink in. "You've achieved something remarkable," Sarah told her. "Not just securing the position, but shifting the conversation about education in this community." "Whitman won't forget this defeat easily," Robert warned. "The monthly reviews give him regular opportunities to interfere. Then I'll need to demonstrate value that even he can't deny." Emma replied determinedly, "Results that speak for themselves." "You've gained powerful allies," Sarah observed. "Dr. Hayes clearly respects your scientific knowledge, and parents are mobilized." Emma's thoughts turned to Matthew Blackwood's strategic intervention. "Mr. Blackwood's support was particularly effective," Robert chuckled. "Matthew doesn't involve himself in town politics often. When he does, people notice." They reached the hotel where Mrs. Jenkins waited on the porch with undisguised curiosity. "Well, did you get it?" "Probationary appointment," Emma confirmed, "with conditions." "But conditions are better than rejection," Mrs. Jenkins declared pragmatically. "Come in for some tea. You can tell me all about how you managed to crack Harold Whitman's iron grip on the school." As Emma recounted the meeting, she found herself lingering on Matthew's unexpected appearance and perfectly timed intervention. "He knew about a hidden collection of advanced books at the school," she explained. "His revelation undermined Whitman's objections about resources." Mrs. Jenkins nodded knowingly. "Matthew Blackwood plays his cards close, doesn't waste words or actions." She refilled Emma's teacup. "For him to step into town politics on your behalf means he sees something worth fighting for." The following morning, Emma was awakened by a knock at her door. Mrs. Jenkins stood outside with a small package. "Delivered for you at dawn," the hotel keeper explained, "by one of Matthew's ranch hands." The package contained a key, clearly for the schoolhouse, and another brief note in Matthew's distinctive handwriting: "You'll want time to organize before Monday. The future of Pine Ridge Valley just changed course." MB Emma dressed quickly and made her way to the schoolhouse, eager to begin preparations for her new role. The morning light streamed through the east-facing windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in golden beams across worn desks and plank flooring. Using the key, Emma unlocked the teacher's desk and began a thorough inventory of available materials. Beyond the standard primers and basic texts visible on open shelves, she located Matthew's hidden collection and several boxes of scientific equipment stored in a cupboard. Simple microscopes, rock specimens, botanical slides, and even a small orrery for demonstrating planetary movements. She was organizing these discoveries when a shadow fell across the doorway. Matthew Blackwood stood there, his tall frame silhouetted against the morning light. "You found the equipment," he observed, stepping inside. "Miss Fairchild collected these?" Emma asked, holding up a remarkably good quality microscope. Matthew smiled slightly. "Some. Others came from my own collection or were ordered through Sarah's store." He moved to examine her growing inventory. "We've tried for years to expand the curriculum incrementally. Miss Fairchild taught the basics publicly and offered advanced instruction privately to interested students. A compromise that ultimately limited impact," Emma observed. "Necessary." "At the time," Matthew acknowledged, "but perhaps no longer." He studied her with that same direct gaze that seemed to see beyond surface appearances. "You've created an opening, Miss Hayes. The question is how effectively you'll use it." "I intend to demonstrate results that even Mr. Whitman can't dismiss," Emma replied. "Children excited about learning, measurable progress, practical applications of knowledge." Matthew nodded approvingly. "Start with what's most visible to parents. Engage their children's enthusiasm, show immediate benefits. Build your foundation of support before introducing more controversial elements." Emma recognized the strategic wisdom in his advice. "You've clearly given this considerable thought." "Education transformed my life," Matthew said simply. "It can do the same for these children, many of whom will otherwise never venture beyond this valley." The parallel to Emma's own words at their first meeting wasn't lost on her. "You mentioned being sent east to school after returning from the Lakota." A shadow crossed Matthew's expression. "My father thought formal education would help me forget my mother's people and their ways." His gaze turned toward the window, toward distant mountains. "Instead, it gave me tools to better understand and value both worlds I inhabited." Emma found herself wanting to know more about this man who moved between cultures with such quiet confidence. But before she could frame another question, the schoolhouse door opened again to admit Kate Miller. "Miss Hayes, I heard the wonderful news." Her face brightened further at the sight of Matthew. "And Mr. Blackwood, are you showing Miss Hayes the special collections?" The arrival of Kate, followed shortly by several curious children who had spotted activity at the schoolhouse, turned the morning into an impromptu planning session. Kate shared insights about individual students' abilities and interests, while the children bombarded Emma with questions about what they would learn under her instruction. Throughout this energetic exchange, Emma noticed Matthew watching with quiet satisfaction, occasionally offering a suggestion or clarification, but largely allowing her to establish her own rapport with her future students. His approach reflected confidence in her abilities rather than any desire to direct or control her methods. As the children eventually dispersed for Saturday chores and Kate departed with promises of further assistance, Emma found herself alone with Matthew once more. "They're ready for more than they've been offered," she observed, gesturing toward the departing children. "They always have been," Matthew agreed. "They just needed someone willing to challenge the limitations imposed upon them." His eyes met hers directly. Someone who understands what it means to have one's potential artificially constrained. The perception in his statement, the recognition of her own experience as a woman whose intellectual gifts had been treated as liabilities rather than assets, struck Emma profoundly. Matthew Blackwood saw her clearly in a way few ever had, understanding without explanation the frustrations that had shaped her journey. "Thank you," she said simply, "for your support at the board meeting. And for this." She gestured to the schoolhouse with its hidden resources. "You fought your own battle effectively," Matthew replied. "I merely provided context that made your position harder to dismiss." A rare smile softened his serious features. "Pine Ridge Valley doesn't know what's about to happen to it." As he turned to leave, Emma felt a curious reluctance to end their conversation. "Will I see you at church tomorrow?" Matthew paused in the doorway. "I attend occasionally, but I often find clearer spiritual connection in the high meadows of Thunder Mountain than in Reverend Phillips's sermons." He glanced back at her. "Though tomorrow might prove an exception worth making." After he departed, Emma continued her preparations with renewed energy and purpose. The probationary appointment represented not just employment or stability, but an opportunity to create meaningful change in young lives. The restrictions Whitman had imposed, monthly curriculum reviews, December evaluation, were clearly intended as mechanisms of control, but Emma already recognized they could become opportunities to demonstrate the value of her approach. By late afternoon, she had developed a structured plan for her first week of teaching, one that would balance traditional expectations with incremental expansions into more progressive territory. She would begin with assessments disguised as engaging activities, identifying each student's capabilities and interests while establishing her authority and approach. As dusk approached, Emma locked the schoolhouse and made her way back toward town, her mind still filled with plans and possibilities. She hardly noticed the elegant carriage that pulled alongside her until a sharp voice called her name. "Miss Hayes." Emma turned to find herself facing Agatha Cooper, who regarded her from the carriage with thinly veiled hostility. "Mrs. Cooper," Emma acknowledged with a polite nod, "I understand you've secured the teaching position through some rather unusual community advocacy," Agatha stated, her tone making it clear what she thought of such democratic processes. "The school board made its decision based on qualifications and community needs," Emma replied neutrally. Agatha's lips tightened. "Mr. Whitman and I have worked for years to maintain proper standards in Pine Ridge Valley, standards that have served this community well. Every community evolves, Mrs. Cooper. Education must evolve with it." "Indeed." Agatha's gaze turned calculating. "I merely wonder whether a woman who arrived as a mail-order bride and proved unsuitable even for that role possesses the moral authority to guide impressionable children." Emma felt a flash of anger, but maintained her composure. "I believe the school board has addressed that concern to their satisfaction." "For now," Agatha agreed with artificial pleasantness, "though one does wonder what further revelations might emerge about your background or character over the coming months." The threat was hardly subtle. Agatha Cooper intended to investigate Emma's past, seeking anything that might undermine her position. "My life is an open book, Mrs. Cooper," Emma replied steadily. "I welcome any genuine interest in my background." "How confident," Agatha observed, "though in my experience, everyone has something they'd prefer remained private." She signaled her driver to continue. "Good evening, Miss Hayes. I'm sure we'll have opportunity for further conversation." As the carriage rolled away, Emma stood motionless, processing the implications of this encounter. She had defeated Harold Whitman in the first direct confrontation, securing the teaching position despite his opposition. But that victory had transformed a powerful enemy's passive disapproval into active hostility. The true battle for Pine Ridge Valley's educational future and Emma's place in it was only beginning. Monday morning dawned bright and clear, the most kind of pristine Montana spring day that made the valley's natural beauty impossible to ignore. Emma arrived at the schoolhouse a full hour before classes were scheduled to begin, her arms laden with material she had prepared over the weekend. She had slept little, her mind racing with both anticipation and strategic planning for the challenges ahead. The schoolhouse looked different somehow this morning, no longer just a building with potential, but her domain. Emma unlocked the door and breathed in the familiar scent of chalk dust and wood polish, feeling a sense of purpose that had eluded her since her parents' deaths. She arranged her materials carefully, positioning the day's lessons on the blackboard and setting out the scientific specimens she had collected on a Sunday afternoon walk. Interesting rocks, pressed spring flowers, and a perfectly preserved butterfly wing. Students began arriving 30 minutes early, their curiosity about the new teacher drawing them to the schoolhouse well before the scheduled bell. Emma greeted each by name, having memorized Kate Miller's student roster with accompanying notes about abilities and interests. By the time she rang the bell for official commencement, 27 students ranging from 6 to 16 years of age had assembled, their faces displaying emotions from open curiosity to guarded skepticism. "Good morning," Emma began, her voice clear and confident despite the flutter of nerves in her stomach. "I'm Miss Hayes, and I'm honored to be your teacher." Rather than launching immediately into rules or expectations as they clearly anticipated, Emma moved to a covered object on her desk. "Learning should begin with questions, not answers," she stated, pulling away the cloth to reveal a small terrarium containing a garden snake she had discovered near the creek. "So my first question to you is, what can we learn from observing this creature?" The children's reactions were immediate and varied. Several younger ones gasped in delight, while older boys tried to appear unimpressed despite their evident interest. A few of the older girls exchanged uncertain glances, clearly wondering if this unconventional approach was appropriate. "It's just a garter snake," offered Tommy Bennett, a 12-year-old whom Kate had described as bright but prone to disruption. "Pa says they're good for gardens because they eat pests." "Excellent observation," Emma acknowledged. "That's ecological knowledge, understanding how different species interact in an environment." She smiled encouragingly. "What else can we observe?" After initial hesitation, observations began flowing more freely. The snake's distinctive markings, its movement patterns, its flicking tongue. Emma guided the discussion skillfully, introducing scientific terminology naturally within the context of their observations, pointing out mathematical concepts in the symmetry of scale patterns, and even connecting to literature through references to snakes in mythology and scripture. By mid-morning, Emma had established a dynamic that would define her teaching approach, engaging students through direct observation and questioning, then connecting those concrete experiences to multiple academic disciplines. Rather than teaching subjects in isolation, she showed how knowledge interconnected, with mathematics supporting science, literature enriching history, and practical skills applying theoretical concepts. The younger children responded with immediate enthusiasm to this hands-on approach. The older students, particularly those who had grown accustomed to memorization and recitation under previous teachers, took longer to adjust, but gradually began participating more actively as they realized Emma welcomed genuine questions and thoughtful disagreement. "How do we know the Earth goes around the sun and not the other way around?" asked Daniel Miller during a geography lesson. "It sure looks like the sun's doing the moving." Instead of providing an immediate answer, Emma smiled. "An excellent scientific question, Daniel. What evidence would convince you one way or the other?" This launched an impromptu discussion about observational evidence versus appearance, with Emma guiding students to consider how limited perspectives might lead to incorrect conclusions. By the time she brought out the orrery, a mechanical model, showing planetary movements, to demonstrate the heliocentric system, the students had intellectually engaged with the concept rather than merely accepting it as doctrine. As the first school day concluded, Emma felt simultaneously exhilarated and exhausted. She had established her approach unmistakably, rigorous but engaging, challenging but supportive. The children departed with actual homework assignments rather than mere memorization tasks, each tailored to their demonstrated abilities. Emma was clearing the blackboard when Kate Miller appeared at the doorway, her face alight with excitement. "Daniel hasn't stopped talking about the snake lesson," she reported. "And he's already started on the observation journal you assigned." "That's wonderful," Emma replied, genuinely pleased. "He has a naturally inquisitive mind." Several parents were waiting when school dismissed, Kate continued. They noticed their children seemed unusually enthusiastic. Emma nodded thoughtfully. "The first impression matters enormously. I wanted them to see learning as an active, engaging process rather than passive absorption of facts." "Well, you've certainly achieved that," Kate affirmed. "Though I should warn you, Mrs. Henderson stopped by the mercantile afterward, questioning whether snake observation constitutes proper education. "I anticipated some resistance," Emma acknowledged. "Change rarely comes without it." As Kate departed, promising to return the following day to assist with the younger children, Emma continued organizing the classroom for tomorrow's lessons. She was so absorbed in her work that she didn't immediately notice the tall figure in the doorway. "I hear you brought nature study directly into the classroom," Matthew Blackwood observed, his tone amused. Emma looked up with a start. "News travels quickly in Pine Ridge. Small towns have efficient information networks," Matthew replied, stepping into the schoolhouse. His gaze took in the transformed space, specimen displays, a wall map annotated, with student observations, desks rearranged into groups rather than rigid rows. "You've been busy." "Learning environments affect thinking," Emma explained. "I want the physical space to reflect our intellectual approach, connected, interactive, organized but not rigid." Matthew nodded approvingly. "The children's reactions?" "Even better than I hoped," Emma admitted, unable to suppress a smile of satisfaction, "particularly once they realized I value questions as much as answers." "And Whitman's spies?" Emma's smile faded slightly. "Mrs. Henderson has already expressed concerns about unconventional methods. I expect her report to reach Mr. Whitman by dinner." "Undoubtedly," Matthew agreed, "though I suspect other parents will offer different perspectives." He moved to examine the butterfly wing display Emma had prepared. "This reminds me of something my mother's people understood intuitively, that learning comes through careful observation and reflection, not just memorization of others' conclusions." "Exactly!" Emma's enthusiasm overcame her usual professional reserve. "True education develops observational skills and critical thinking, not just the ability to repeat information." Matthew studied her with quiet intensity. "You recognize what few teachers do, that how we learn shapes us more profoundly than what we learn." The perceptiveness of his observation struck Emma deeply. Before she could respond, however, a sharp voice interrupted from the doorway. "Well, isn't this cozy?" Harold Whitman stood on the threshold, his substantial frame blocking much of the afternoon light. His gaze moved deliberately between Emma and Matthew, his expression calculating. "Mr. Whitman," Emma acknowledged professionally, "I was just preparing tomorrow's lessons." "With Mr. Blackwood's assistance, apparently," Whitman observed, his tone making the comment sound vaguely improper. "How progressive." Matthew's expression remained impassive. "I was inquiring about the first day's results. As a taxpayer contributing to educational funding, I have a legitimate interest." Whitman stepped fully into the schoolhouse, his attention shifting to the classroom's transformed arrangement. "Interesting changes you've made, Miss Hayes. Rather significant for someone on a probationary appointment." "Physical environment affects learning," Emma replied evenly. "These adjustments support the educational approach I outlined to the board." Whitman picked up one of the rock specimens, examining it dismissively before setting it down with exaggerated care. "I've received reports about today's unusual activities. Snakes in the classroom, questioning established astronomical principles, discussing indigenous beliefs alongside scientific theories." His emphasis on indigenous, with a sidelong glance at Matthew, made the implicit criticism clear. "I integrated multiple perspectives to demonstrate how different knowledge systems approach natural phenomena," Emma explained, maintaining her professional tone despite the deliberate provocation. The students were highly engaged. "Engagement isn't education, Miss Hayes," Whitman countered smoothly. "Structure and discipline build character. Entertainment builds nothing of lasting value." "I assure you, Mr. Whitman, rigorous learning occurred throughout the day. I would be happy to demonstrate the students' progress at any time." Whitman's smile didn't reach his eyes. Indeed. The first curriculum review is scheduled for months, and I look forward to quantifiable results rather than enthusiastic anecdotes. He turned his attention deliberately to Matthew. The school board handles educational oversight, Blackwood. Your presence here is unnecessary. I was actually discussing the possibility of a field excursion to observe scientific principles in practice, Matthew replied evenly. My ranch offers excellent opportunities for botanical and geological study. Whitman's expression hardened. Field excursions require board approval, Miss Hayes. I trust you'll remember the conditions of your appointment. Of course, Emma agreed, refusing to be intimidated. I'll submit a formal proposal for the board's consideration. See that you do. Whitman adjusted his vest importantly. Good day, Miss Hayes. Remember that you represent this community's educational standards. Unconventional methods may entertain children temporarily, but proper academic fundamentals endure. After he departed, Emma released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. That was illuminating. He's concerned, Matthew observed, a hint of satisfaction in his tone. Children's enthusiasm is a powerful currency with parents, one Whitman hadn't anticipated you'd generate so quickly. Hence the reminder about quantifiable results, Emma concluded. He expects parents' initial approval to diminish when traditional academic measures aren't immediately visible. Exactly. Your approach builds deeper understanding, but may not produce the memorized recitations Whitman considers evidence of learning. Matthew's expression grew thoughtful. You'll need to demonstrate progress in terms he recognizes while continuing to implement your true methods. Emma nodded, already formulating strategies. Regular assessments that show traditional skills, improving alongside deeper conceptual development. For several moments, they worked together, outlining approaches that would satisfy Whitman's expectations while advancing Emma's educational vision. The collaboration felt remarkably natural, with Matthew's practical insights complementing Emma's pedagogical expertise. As evening approached, Emma gathered her materials to depart. Thank you for your support today. Matthew held the door as they exited. The children's enthusiasm will be your strongest defense. Whitman understands power, and parents' approval represents power he can't easily dismiss. They walked together. Toward town, the setting sun casting long shadows across the valley. As they passed the general store, Sarah Williams stepped outside, her expression concerned. Emma, I was just coming to find you, she said without preamble. There's talk at the bank about investigating your financial situation. Whitman's claiming potential impropriety in how you're supporting yourself on a teacher's modest salary. Emma felt a chill despite the warm evening. That's absurd. My arrangements with Mrs. Jenkins are entirely proper, and my expenses are minimal. It's a pressure tactic, Matthew said quietly. Create enough questions about your circumstances to undermine your position. Precisely, Sarah agreed. And there's more. Agatha Cooper has written to connections in Boston seeking information about your background. Emma stiffened. There was nothing scandalous in her past, but her family's financial collapse and her father's unorthodox educational approaches for his daughter had generated plenty of society gossip. Presented selectively, such information could certainly damage her standing in a conservative frontier community. I have nothing to hide, Emma stated firmly, though I doubt Mrs. Cooper's inquiries are designed to present a balanced picture. They rarely are, Sarah replied dryly. I just wanted you to be prepared. First impressions matter enormously in small communities, and you've made a strong positive one. Whitman and the Coopers will work to undermine it before it solidifies. After Sarah returned to her store, Matthew walked Emma the remaining distance to the hotel. Are you concerned about what Mrs. Cooper might discover? He asked directly. Emma considered the question carefully. Not concerned about truth, my father's academic reputation was impeccable despite his progressive views on women's education. But selective presentation can distort even honorable circumstances. Then we should prepare a complete narrative rather than reactive defenses, Matthew suggested pragmatically. Proper context prevents misinterpretation. The "we" in his statement wasn't lost on Emma. Matthew had aligned himself unequivocally with her position in this escalating conflict. Before she could respond appropriately, Mrs. Jenkins appeared on the hotel porch. "Miss Hayes, there's a telegram for you," she called, holding up a yellow paper. Emma thanked Matthew for the escort and hurried to retrieve the message, her mind racing with possibilities. The telegram was brief but consequential. "Inquiries made about your circumstances. Stop newspaper seeking. Quote regarding professor's daughter becoming mail order bride. Stop advise how to respond. Stop. Dr. Elizabeth Foster, Boston, Ladies College." Dr. Foster had been one of Emma's father's closest colleagues and had continued mentoring Emma after his death. If she was receiving inquiries about Emma, the investigation had indeed begun in earnest. "Troubling news?" Mrs. Jenkins asked, noting Emma's expression. "Confirmation of Mrs. Cooper's activities," Emma replied, showing her the telegram. "She's moved quickly." Mrs. Jenkins read it with a frown. "Attempting to shame you through Eastern newspapers, that's particularly underhanded, even for Agatha." "It's strategic," Emma observed, her analytical mind recognizing the calculated nature of the attack. "Undermine my credibility in both communities simultaneously. If Boston Society publications mock my circumstances, Pine Ridge will question my respectability." "What will you do?" Emma's jaw set with determination. "Respond with complete transparency. Dr. Foster is a powerful ally who can ensure any published account includes my father's academic standing and my educational qualifications." She immediately drafted a reply explaining the situation and requesting Dr. Foster to emphasize Professor Hayes's respected position and Emma's trained teaching capabilities rather than the mail-order bride narrative Agatha clearly hoped would dominate. The following morning, Emma faced her students with renewed purpose, determined that the quality of her teaching would establish a foundation too solid for Whitman and the Coopers to undermine. She implemented a subtle but effective strategy, maintaining her engaging, progressive methods while incorporating assessments that would demonstrate traditional academic progress. Students who had arrived enthusiastic after the first day now brought friends and siblings previously resistant to schooling. By week's end, attendance had increased from 27 to 34 students, including several teenagers who had previously abandoned formal education. Where she had initially seen only a somewhat passive individual dominated by his mother's strong personality, she now recognized someone caught between social expectations and personal inclinations. "The children are wonderful," she replied neutrally. "I'm enjoying the work immensely." George glanced toward where his mother was watching their interaction with obvious disapproval. "I should apologize for how things transpired upon your arrival. The arrangements were made with certain expectations that perhaps weren't adequately communicated." The carefully phrased semi-apology revealed more about George's character than he likely intended. A man who recognized improper treatment but lacked courage to oppose it directly. "Water under the bridge, Mr. Cooper," Emma assured him. "Everything has worked out for the best." Something like genuine regret flashed across George's features. "Yes, well, Mother can be rather particular about traditional roles and expectations." Before Emma could respond, Agatha Cooper's sharp voice cut through their conversation. "George, we're departing." The older woman fixed Emma with a cold stare before turning imperiously toward their waiting carriage. George nodded awkwardly and hurried after his mother, leaving Emma to wonder about the complex dynamics within the Cooper household. It seemed George might not be entirely comfortable with his mother's methods, though he clearly lacked the will to oppose them. "Interesting exchange," Matthew commented, approaching once the Coopers had departed. "George has always been caught between his own temperament and his mother's ambitions. He seems conflicted," Emma observed. "George Cooper isn't a malicious man," Matthew acknowledged fairly, "just a weak one, which sometimes causes more harm through inaction than stronger characters do through direct opposition." They walked together toward town, continuing their analysis of the community dynamics revealed through the church gathering. Matthew identified subtle shifts in allegiances. Families previously aligned with the Coopers showing independence, Whitman's usual supporters displaying curiosity about the school's new approach. "The narrative is shifting," Matthew noted with satisfaction. "You're no longer just the rejected mail-order bride, but Miss Hayes, the teacher who's ignited unprecedented enthusiasm for learning." "Whitman and Mrs. Cooper recognize that too," Emma replied, "hence the accelerated counterattacks." As they reached the hotel, Matthew's expression grew more serious. "Next week will bring increased pressure." The editorial was just the opening volley. "Are you prepared for what follows?" Emma straightened her shoulders. "I've spent my life having my capabilities underestimated, Mr. Blackwood. It's familiar territory." "I don't underestimate you," Matthew said quietly, his direct gaze communicating complete confidence in her abilities. The simple statement affected Emma more profoundly than elaborate praise might have. Throughout her life, even well-meaning supporters had expressed surprise at her intellectual achievements, remarkable for a woman being the common qualification. Matthew's matter-of-fact acknowledgement of her capabilities without gender qualifiers represented a form of respect she had rarely encountered. "Thank you," she replied simply. "That means a great deal." The following week confirmed Matthew's prediction about escalating pressure. Each day brought new challenges to Emma's authority and methods, clearly orchestrated by Whitman and the Coopers. On Monday, Mr. Henderson arrived unannounced to observe proper educational practices, positioning himself at the back of the classroom with a notebook and disapproving expression. Emma acknowledged him politely, then proceeded with her lesson on botanical classification with such engaging demonstrations that even Mr. Henderson found himself reluctantly participating in the students' enthusiasm. Tuesday brought a letter from the school board, clearly dictated by Whitman, though bearing Reverend Phillips's signature, reminding Emma that religious instruction must maintain traditional interpretations and questioning whether her comparative approach to creation, narratives from different cultures, was appropriate for impressionable minds. Wednesday's challenge came in the form of curriculum interference, a delivery of new reading primers with a note indicating the board had updated approved materials, effectively attempting to replace the more advanced texts Emma had introduced. She simply incorporated them as supplementary resources while continuing to use the comprehensive materials. Each evening, Emma documented these interactions meticulously, building a record of systematic interference while continuing to compile evidence of student progress. She worked late into the night, developing strategies that would maintain her educational approach while addressing or circumventing obstacles. By Thursday, the pattern of escalation was unmistakable. As Emma dismissed her students for the day, she found Harold Whitman himself waiting outside the schoolhouse, accompanied by Agatha Cooper and Dr. Hayes. The unexpected presence of the physician suggested this confrontation had been carefully planned to include the one board member who had previously supported Emma's appointment. Miss Hayes Whitman began with artificial cordiality. We thought an informal progress assessment might be appropriate, given the concerns that have been raised. Of course, Emma replied calmly, though her heart raced at this obvious ambush. I've been documenting student progress systematically. Would you care to review my records? The question momentarily unbalanced Whitman, who had clearly expected defensive justification rather than confident evidence. Records are easily manipulated, Agatha Cooper interjected dismissively. Direct examination is more revealing. Emma maintained her composure. I welcome any assessment of my students' learning. Would you prefer to review their work or perhaps question them directly? Both would seem appropriate, Dr. Hayes suggested reasonably, his expression betraying discomfort with the confrontational approach of his companions. Excellent, Emma agreed, leading them back into the schoolhouse where student work was prominently displayed. As you can see, we've made substantial progress in multiple areas. What followed was essentially an impromptu inspection, with Whitman and Mrs. Cooper seeking deficiencies, while Emma calmly presented evidence of achievement. The younger students' reading samples showed remarkable advancement, while older students' mathematical work demonstrated both computational accuracy and conceptual understanding. This geographical survey seems rather advanced for frontier education, Whitman observed, examining a project where students had mapped local watersheds and calculated potential irrigation coverage. Applied mathematics and geography, Emma explained. The students are using trigonometric principles to solve practical problems directly relevant to agricultural planning. Dr. Hayes examined the work with genuine interest. This is quite impressive, Miss Hayes. The students have grasped concepts that typically challenge much older learners. Because they see immediate applications, Emma explained. Abstract principles become concrete when connected to their lived experience. As the inspection continued, Emma recognized with growing confidence that her meticulous documentation and strategic teaching had anticipated precisely this type of challenge. For every criticism Whitman or Mrs. Cooper raised, she had clear evidence of educational value and student progress. The confrontation reached its climax when Agatha Cooper pulled a letter from her handbag with theatrical timing. Perhaps you can explain this communication I've received from Boston, she said with poorly concealed triumph. It describes your father's unconventional approaches and subsequent professional difficulties. Emma felt a cold certainty that whatever the letter contained would be selectively presented to damage her standing. Before she could respond, however, the schoolhouse door opened to admit Matthew Blackwood and Robert Jensen. Afternoon, folks, Robert greeted them casually. Hope we're not interrupting. Matthew and I came to discuss the field trip proposal with Miss Hayes. The unexpected arrival of allies clearly disrupted Agatha's planned revelation. She hesitated, glancing at Whitman for direction. Matthew surveyed the scene with calm assessment. Informal evaluation, Mr. Whitman. I'd be interested in hearing the board's impressions of Miss Hayes' remarkable progress. His phrasing, assuming positive assessment rather than critical review, subtly shifted the dynamic. Dr. Hayes, already impressed by the student work he'd examined, nodded in agreement. The mathematical applications are particularly noteworthy, the physician commented. Practical implementation of theoretical concepts is pedagogically advanced. Whitman, recognizing his carefully orchestrated confrontation was unraveling, attempted to regain control. Academic fundamentals are only part of proper education. Character development and moral instruction are embedded throughout our curriculum, Emma interjected confidently. Perhaps you'd like to review the ethical reasoning exercises the older students completed this week. They analyzed historical decisions using multiple philosophical frameworks. The systematic dismantling of their criticisms with concrete evidence had clearly frustrated Whitman and Mrs. Cooper's plans. Whatever damaging information Agatha had hoped to reveal from Boston now seemed insufficient against the compelling evidence of Emma's educational effectiveness. "We'll continue this assessment at the formal curriculum review," Whitman finally declared, attempting to salvage authority from the increasingly awkward confrontation. "Come, Agatha. Dr. Hayes." As they departed, Dr. Hayes lingered briefly. "Truly impressive work, Miss Hayes," he said quietly. "Your father's methods, while perhaps unconventional by Boston standards, seem remarkably effective here." After they had gone, Emma released a shaky breath. "That was intense and unsuccessful," Robert pointed out with satisfaction. "They came expecting to find deficiencies and instead encountered undeniable progress." "Agatha still has that letter," Emma reminded them, her concern returning. "Whatever information she's received from Boston may require countering with our own correspondence," Matthew finished practically. "Sarah received a telegram this morning from someone named Dr. Foster in Boston. Apparently, your mentor has been quite thorough in documenting your father's academic standing and your own qualifications." Relief washed through Emma. Elizabeth Foster's support would provide crucial balance against whatever selective information Agatha had obtained. "Your preparation made the difference," Matthew observed, examining the meticulous documentation Emma had compiled. "You anticipated their tactics and had evidence ready to counter each criticism." Emma smiled slightly. "My father always said that in intellectual battles, systematic evidence prevails over emotional appeals." "Usually," Robert agreed. "Though in small communities, perception often matters as much as fact. Which is precisely why Whitman and Mrs. Cooper will likely shift tactics after today's failure," Matthew concluded. "Direct academic criticism proved ineffective. They'll move to more personal approaches." His prediction proved accurate far sooner than Emma anticipated. As she walked toward the hotel after Matthew and Robert departed, she noticed unusual attention from townspeople, quiet conversations that ceased as she approached, glances that held a new quality of speculation. Mrs. Jenkins met her at the hotel entrance, her expression troubled. "There's talk spreading through town," she said without preamble, "about you and Matthew Blackwood." Emma stared at her in confusion. "What kind of talk?" "The kind Agatha Cooper excels at generating," Mrs. Jenkins replied grimly. "Insinuations about improper meetings, special attention, romantic entanglements." The deliberate attempt to create scandal from her professional collaboration with Matthew represented exactly the shift in tactics Matthew himself had predicted, from attacking her teaching directly to undermining her personal reputation. "That's absurd," Emma protested. "Mr. Blackwood has simply supported educational improvements as a community member." "You and I know that," Mrs. Jenkins agreed. "But Agatha Cooper is skilled at transforming innocent circumstances into questionable appearances. And unmarried men and women having private meetings for any reason offers fertile ground for gossip." Emma recognized the dangerous territory immediately. On the frontier, a female teacher's moral standing was even more precarious than in Eastern communities. The merest hint of impropriety could destroy her professional position, regardless of her educational effectiveness. "What should I do?" she asked, uncharacteristically uncertain. Mrs. Jenkins considered the question seriously. "Don't retreat or act guilty. That only confirms suspicions. Continue your work exactly as before, but perhaps ensure meetings with Matthew occur in more public settings for the immediate future." As Emma climbed the stairs to her room, she felt the full weight of the escalating conflict. Whitman and the Coopers, having failed to discredit her teaching directly, were now targeting her personal reputation, a far more vulnerable area for a single woman in a frontier community. The strategic shift represented both a victory and a new danger. Her educational methods had proven too effective to dismiss directly, forcing her opponents to adopt more personal attacks. But those personal attacks threatened not just her professional standing, but her very place in the community. Standing at her window, watching the sunset paint Thunder Mountain in shades of gold and purple, Emma faced the grim reality that the next phase of this conflict would test not just her teaching abilities, but her personal resilience. The community that had begun to accept her as their children's teacher would now be asked to judge her character based on manufactured innuendo. As darkness fell over Pine Ridge Valley, Emma made a decision. She would neither retreat from her educational mission, nor abandon her alliance with Matthew and others who supported true learning. Instead, she would continue her work with absolute propriety while demonstrating through consistent behavior that the rumors were baseless. The true test of character, her father had often said, comes not when the path is clear, but when false. Narratives obscure it. If Whitman and the Coopers believed they could drive her from Pine Ridge Valley through character assassination, they had fundamentally misunderstood whom they were fighting. The whispers spread through Pine Ridge Valley like morning mist, insubstantial yet pervasive, difficult to grasp yet impossible to ignore. Emma maintained her dignified composure as she walked to the schoolhouse each morning, acutely aware of the speculative glances that followed her progress through town. The rumors about her relationship with Matthew Blackwood had taken on a life of their own, embellished with each retelling until even the most innocuous interactions became evidence of impropriety in gossip's accounts. "Hold your head high," Sarah Williams advised during a quiet moment in the Mercantile. "Most folks recognize Agatha Cooper's tactics for what they are." "Most, but not all," Emma replied realistically. "I've noticed several parents watching me, with new suspicion when they collect their children." "The Henderson faction," Sarah acknowledged. "They were predisposed to doubt you from the beginning, but you've gained stronger allies than you've lost." This was true. As rumors circulated, Pine Ridge Valley had begun dividing into increasingly defined factions. Those who had experienced the benefits of Emma's teaching methods firsthand, primarily families with school-age children, generally dismissed the gossip as transparent manipulation. Those already aligned with Whitman's interests used the rumors to justify pre-existing opposition. Most significant was the growing middle group, community members previously uninvolved who now found themselves drawn into taking positions on educational philosophy and community governance. The formal curriculum review loomed just days away. Emma had prepared exhaustive documentation of student progress, examples of work demonstrating both traditional academic achievement and deeper conceptual understanding. She had anticipated every potential criticism with empirical evidence of educational effectiveness, yet she knew the review would likely focus on character rather than curriculum, Whitman and the Coopers having shifted to more personal grounds. In for attack, Wednesday afternoon brought unexpected support from a surprising quarter. As Emma dismissed her students, Dr. Hayes appeared at the schoolhouse door. "Miss Hayes, might I have a moment of your time?" he requested formally. "Of course." "Dr. Hayes," Emma gestured to the now empty classroom. "How may I help you?" The physician entered, removing his hat and appearing uncharacteristically hesitant. "This is somewhat delicate. I find myself in an uncomfortable position." Emma steeled herself. For another challenge, perhaps some new allegation she would need to counter. "Mrs. Cooper shared certain correspondence from Boston during yesterday's Ladies' Auxiliary meeting," Dr. Hayes continued. "Selective portions of letters regarding your father's financial difficulties and subsequent professional challenges." "I see." Emma maintained her composure despite the painful reminder of her family's circumstances. "And this concerns you professionally?" "It concerns me ethically," Dr. Hayes corrected with surprising firmness. The presentation was deliberately misleading. Your father's financial losses were presented as evidence of moral failing rather than investment misfortune, and his educational approaches for you were characterized as inappropriate rather than progressive. Emma hadn't expected this forthright assessment. Thank you for telling me directly. There's more. Dr. Hayes appeared increasingly uncomfortable. I received a telegram yesterday from Dr. Elizabeth Foster at Boston Ladies College. Apparently, she's an old colleague who recognized my name when you mentioned corresponding with me. Dr. Foster was my father's close friend and my mentor, Emma confirmed, hope rising that Elizabeth's intervention might be providing unexpected support. She provided comprehensive context about Professor Hayes's academic standing and your own educational qualifications. Dr. Hayes met her gaze directly. It appears Mrs. Cooper's sources have been highly selective in their accounts. That doesn't surprise me, Emma acknowledged. It should concern all of us when deliberate misrepresentation is used to undermine legitimate authority, Dr. Hayes stated with newfound conviction. I've been complicit in Whitman's control of this community for too long, allowing financial entanglements to compromise professional judgment. The physician's unexpected candor suggested a moral awakening that might significantly impact the power dynamics in Pine Ridge Valley. Are you preparing to oppose Mr. Whitman at the curriculum review? Emma asked directly. I'm preparing to evaluate educational outcomes objectively, regardless of political considerations. Dr. Hayes replied, carefully. Your results speak for themselves, Miss Hayes. The children's progress is remarkable by any standard. After the doctor departed, Emma considered the implications of this unexpected support. If Dr. Hayes publicly broke from Whitman's influence, others might find courage to do the same. The community's perception of Whitman's absolute control could begin to fracture. That evening, a knock at Emma's hotel room door revealed Kate Miller bearing a sealed note. From Mr. Blackwood, Kate explained, her expression worried. He asked me to deliver it directly to you. Emma thanked her and closed the door before opening the message, conscious of how even innocent communication might fuel existing rumors. Miss Hayes, recent developments require strategic reconsideration. Cooper faction accelerating timeline. Sunday's sermon will directly address moral concerns in educational leadership. Imperative we coordinate community response before formal review. Cannot meet directly given current climate. Sarah Williams will host educational discussion at Mercantile tomorrow evening, ostensibly about new school books, actually about organizing parent support. Exercise caution in public settings. Henderson following your movements on Whitman's instruction. MB, the note's terse style conveyed both urgency and Matthew's concern about written communication being intercepted. Emma burned it in the small stove after memorizing its contents, recognizing that any physical evidence of private correspondence would only strengthen the rumors. The following day brought confirmation of Matthew's warning. Emma noticed Mr. Henderson's daughter, Clara, following her movements with obvious intent during the lunch recess. Later, as Emma walked to the post office after school, she glimpsed Mr. Henderson himself observing from the barber shop, making a pretense of reading a newspaper while clearly tracking her movements. The surveillance was both unsettling and strangely validating, evidence that Whitman considered her influence significant enough to warrant such measures. Emma maintained her usual routines while carefully avoiding anything that could be misconstrued. She visited Sarah's Mercantile, as was her habit each Thursday, to purchase personal necessities, giving no indication of the evening's planned meeting. Quite a selection of new books arrived on yesterday's stage, Sarah mentioned conversationally, as she wrapped Emma's purchases. Several parents expressed interest in reviewing them this evening after closing. Educational materials are always valuable, Emma replied with equal casualness. Will you be extending your hours today? Until 8 o'clock, Sarah confirmed, for interested community members. That evening, Emma approached the gathering with careful timing, neither conspicuously early nor suspiciously late. She entered the mercantile to find a surprisingly large assembly already present, at least 20 adults representing families from across Pine Ridge Valley's social spectrum. Most encouraging was the presence of Dr. Hayes and Robert Jensen, whose professional standing lent legitimacy to the gathering. Less expected was George Cooper seated quietly in the corner, his presence without his mother a significant departure from established patterns. Sarah locked the door once everyone had arrived, drawing curtains across the windows to ensure privacy. "Thank you for coming on such short notice," she began without preamble. "As you're all aware, Miss Hayes's teaching methods have generated both remarkable educational results and considerable controversy." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the gathering. Sarah continued, "Sunday's sermon will apparently address moral leadership in our school, and Monday's curriculum review will likely focus more on character allegations than educational outcomes." "Shameful tactics," declared Mrs. Peterson, forcefully. "My Jacob has learned more mathematics in a month under Miss Hayes than in 2 years prior." "My concerns are practical," stated Mr. Lawrence, a successful rancher known for his independence from Whitman's interests. "The railroad's coming next year. Our children need modern education to compete in changing economies. I've compiled similar evidence regarding economic benefits," Robert Jensen added. "Surveying skills that improved irrigation efficiency, mathematical literacy that prevented pricing exploitation, record-keeping methods that enhanced agricultural planning." One by one, community members offered similar concrete examples of how Emma's teaching had positively impacted practical aspects of Valley life. The collective evidence transformed abstract educational philosophy into tangible community benefits, precisely the kind of pragmatic outcomes that would resonate with frontier pragmatism. As the meeting continued, developing coordinated strategies for both Sunday's church service and Monday's curriculum review, Emma observed a remarkable transformation. What had begun as her individual struggle against entrenched authority had evolved into a community movement for educational self-determination. Matthew remained physically distant throughout the gathering, carefully avoiding any interaction that might feed existing rumors. Yet his strategic contributions anchored the discussion, guiding without dominating as community members found their collective voice. As the meeting concluded, participants departed in small groups rather than en masse, maintaining the appearance of normal evening shopping rather than organized resistance. Emma lingered to help Sarah reorganize the store, conscious that her departure alongside Matthew would validate rather than dispel rumors. "This changes everything," Sarah observed once only she, Emma, and Matthew remained. "Whitman expected to isolate you. Instead, he's catalyzed community organization." George Cooper's participation was particularly unexpected, Emma noted, still processing the significance of his small rebellion. "George has always been more thoughtful than his mother's influence suggests," Matthew commented. "He's caught between financial dependence and emerging conscience." Sarah checked the windows to ensure no observers remained before addressing the situation directly. "The rumors about you two are spreading precisely as Agatha planned. Sunday's sermon will undoubtedly reference moral concerns directly." "We've maintained absolute propriety," Emma stated firmly. "Propriety doesn't combat calculated insinuation," Sarah countered practically. "Agatha doesn't need evidence, just suggestion." Matthew's expression remained impassive, but his voice carried controlled frustration. "The strategy is transparent. Unable to challenge educational outcomes directly, they attack character to undermine authority, which places us in a tactical dilemma," Emma acknowledged. Complete avoidance appears confirming of guilt, while normal professional interaction feeds malicious interpretation. There's another option, Sarah suggested carefully. Formalize the relationship. Both Emma and Matthew stared at her in surprise. I'm not proposing actual marriage, Sarah clarified quickly, but a public acknowledgement of potential courtship, conducted with appropriate chaperonage, would transform scandal into conventional social process. The suggestion hung in the air between them. Emma felt her cheeks warm despite her usual composure. The pragmatic proposal made strategic sense, potentially neutralizing Agatha's most potent weapon of social innuendo. Yet it required acknowledging something neither she nor Matthew had directly addressed: the unmistakable connection that had formed between them beyond mere educational alliance. That would be Miss Hayes's decision entirely, Matthew stated after a moment, his tone carefully neutral, though his eyes held a question when they met Emma's. I'll consider the strategic implications, Emma replied with equal care, unwilling to make such a consequential decision under immediate pressure. They departed separately, Emma first with Sarah's escort, then Matthew through the back entrance once sufficient time had elapsed. As Emma prepared for bed that night, her mind circled restlessly around Sarah's suggestion. The idea was tactically sound. Social conventions regarding courtship would transform whispered accusations into mundane process, shifting perception from scandal to ordinary community occurrence. Yet it would also fundamentally alter her relationship with Matthew, introducing personal dimensions to what had been a principled professional alliance. More troubling was the recognition that her response to the suggestion hadn't been solely strategic. The momentary meeting of their eyes had revealed something beyond tactical consideration, an unspoken acknowledgement of connection that transcended educational philosophy or community politics. By morning, Emma had reached no definitive conclusion. She dressed with particular care, selecting her most conservative gown and arranging her hair in its most modest style. Whatever decisions the coming days required, maintaining absolute professional dignity remained essential. The community's factions had crystallized, those supporting educational progress, those defending traditional authority, and the diminishing middle ground of uncommitted residents. Emma maintained her usual routines, visiting the mercantile for supplies, exchanging polite greetings with townspeople regardless of their factional alignment, working on lesson plans in her hotel room. She neither sought nor avoided public visibility, demonstrating through consistent behavior that she had nothing to hide. Saturday evening brought another note delivered discreetly by Sarah during Emma's brief visit to the mercantile. Sunday service will be well attended. Your presence demonstrates confidence in community judgment. Reverend Phillips has been reminded that his congregation includes diverse perspectives. Monday's review has been moved to town hall rather than schoolhouse. Larger venue acknowledging public interest. MB. The note's implications were clear. Community organization had progressed beyond initial planning to active intervention. Reverend Phillips had apparently received some form of communication indicating that overtly political sermonizing might have consequences for church attendance or financial support. The relocation of Monday's review suggested Whitman had recognized the inevitability of public attendance and was attempting to maintain control by changing venues. Sunday morning dawned clear and cool, the kind of pristine spring day that showcased the valley's natural beauty. Emma dressed with deliberate care in her most formal attire, a navy blue dress whose severe styling and high collar epitomized propriety. As she walked toward the church, she noticed unusual activity throughout town. Families traveling from outlying ranches who typically attended monthly rather than weekly services. Residents whose church participation had previously been sporadic. The church itself was filled nearly to capacity when Emma arrived, with significant representation from all segments of the community. She took a seat beside Kate and Mrs. Miller, maintaining dignified composure despite the speculative glances directed her way. Reverend Phillips appeared visibly discomfited by the unprecedented attendance, his gaze scanning the congregation with poorly concealed anxiety. His sermon, clearly rewritten from whatever had been originally planned, focused on community harmony and respecting diverse perspectives, vague platitudes rather than the direct moral condemnation Matthew's intelligence had indicated. Emma noted Agatha Cooper's tight-lipped disapproval throughout the sermon, while Harold Whitman's expression shifted between calculation and frustration. Their planned public condemnation had clearly been neutralized by unexpected community mobilization. Most significant was the congregation's behavior following the service. Rather than the usual swift dispersal, most families remained, engaging in animated conversations that deliberately crossed factional lines. Emma found herself approached by parents from all segments of the community, many expressing direct support for her educational methods, others asking genuine questions about her approach. "The children say you're teaching them about electricity. Next week," commented Mrs. Thompson, wife of the telegrapher, who had previously maintained careful neutrality. "My husband says understanding such principles will be essential for future employment opportunities. Basic electrical theory connects directly to natural science and mathematical principles," Emma confirmed. "Understanding how forces interact develops both practical skills and cognitive capabilities." Similar conversations occurred throughout the churchyard, with the cumulative effect of normalizing Emma's educational approach as community enhancement rather than controversial innovation. Particularly notable was Dr. Hayes engaging publicly, with more traditional community members lending his professional authority to pedagogical discussions. Emma maintained appropriate distance from Matthew throughout these interactions, though she noted his strategic conversations with key community influencers. His careful diplomacy was creating bridges between previously opposed factions, finding common ground in practical benefits of comprehensive education. As the churchyard gathering gradually dispersed, Emma found herself momentarily alone near the picket fence surrounding the church grounds. George Cooper approached hesitantly, glancing toward where his mother was engaged in intense conversation with Harold Whitman. "Miss Hayes," he acknowledged awkwardly, "I hope to speak with you, briefly." "Mr. Cooper," Emma replied with polite neutrality, curious about his purpose. George shifted uncomfortably. "I wanted you to know that I disagree with certain methods being employed regarding your position. They don't reflect my personal views." The careful distancing from his mother's tactics represented a more public declaration of independence than his participation in the mercantile meeting. "I appreciate your clarification," Emma responded. "The educational principles you've implemented benefit the entire community." George continued with growing confidence. "As someone concerned with regional economic development, I recognize their practical value regardless of personal history." The banker's acknowledgement of her teaching effectiveness, despite the original circumstances of her arrival, demonstrated emerging professional judgment, independent of his mother's social prejudices. "Thank you, Mr. Cooper. Community support for educational advancement is essential for regional development." George nodded, seemingly relieved by her professional response. "Tomorrow's review will likely involve contentious elements, but please know that objective assessment increasingly favors your methods." After he departed, Emma contemplated the significance of this interaction. George Cooper's subtle rebellion against his mother's influence represented another fracture in Whitman's previously solid alliance system. The young banker was positioning himself based on economic pragmatism rather than social conservatism, a shift that could significantly impact Pine Ridge Valley's future development. As Emma returned to the hotel, she found Sarah Williams waiting, In the lobby, her expression concerned. "You should see this immediately," Sarah said without preamble, handing Emma a telegram that had arrived during church services. "Arriving Monday morning, stop. Received disturbing correspondence regarding your situation. Stop, Dr. Elizabeth Foster." The unexpected announcement of her mentor's impending arrival represented both potential support and complicating factor. Dr. Foster's academic credentials and personal knowledge of Professor Hayes would provide powerful counterweight to Agatha Cooper's distortions. Yet her arrival might also be perceived as outside interference in community affairs, potentially reinforcing Whitman's narrative about Eastern elitism versus frontier pragmatism. "This changes our approach," Sarah observed. "Dr. Foster's testimony provides academic authority that Whitman can't easily dismiss, or gives him evidence of outside agitators undermining local governance," Emma countered pragmatically. "The impact depends entirely on how her participation is framed." As they discussed strategic adaptations for Monday's review, Mrs. Jenkins joined them with additional intelligence. Harold Whitman has been in closed meeting with the Coopers since church dismissed. Something's changed in their approach. They sent telegrams to Helena this afternoon. This suggested Whitman was seeking higher authority to reinforce his position, perhaps territorial educational officials or political connections who might override local community sentiment. "They're escalating beyond local resources," Emma concluded. "Our community organization has forced them to seek external reinforcement." Sunday evening brought unprecedented activity to Pine Ridge Valley. Families who typically maintained isolation on the day of rest engaged in visiting and discussion. The hotel dining room filled with residents exchanging perspectives on educational needs and community governance. Emma participated judiciously in these conversations, maintaining professional demeanor while addressing questions about her teaching philosophy directly. Most significant was the gradual formation of a cohesive community vision that transcended factional interests, not unanimous agreement, but emerging consensus that educational advancement served practical frontier needs rather than representing abstract philosophical preference. As Emma prepared for bed, she reviewed her documentation for the following day's curriculum review. The evidence of educational effectiveness was compelling by any objective standard. The question remained whether institutional authority would acknowledge empirical evidence or maintain predetermined positions regardless of demonstrated outcomes. A soft knock at her door revealed Mrs. Jenkins with one final communication of the day, a brief note whose handwriting Emma recognized immediately. "Whatever tomorrow brings, know that Pine Ridge Valley has already changed irreversibly. Education has become community priority rather than institutional obligation. Your courage has catalyzed transformation that extends beyond any single review outcome. With admiration and unwaveringly respect, Matthew." The simple message acknowledged the larger significance of what had already been accomplished, regardless of formal institutional decisions. Emma recognized the truth in Matthew's assessment. The community had awakened to educational self-determination in ways that would persist beyond any individual teacher's tenure. As she extinguished her lamp, Emma felt curious calm, despite the consequential confrontation ahead. Whatever tactical maneuvers Whitman and the Coopers might employ, the strategic landscape had fundamentally shifted. Pine Ridge Valley's residents had discovered their collective voice regarding educational priorities, and that awakening would not easily be reversed. The morning would bring Dr. Foster's arrival, Monday's formal review, and likely additional challenges from Whitman's escalating opposition. Yet Emma faced these prospects with confidence, born not merely from individual conviction, but from the community alliance that had formed around educational principles. What had begun as her isolated defense against entrenched authority had transformed into a community movement for educational self-determination. The emerging alliance transcended her personal circumstances, creating possibilities for Pine Ridge Valley's development that would endure regardless of individual outcomes. Emma drifted towards sleep with renewed certainty in the fundamental principle her father had always emphasized. Education properly understood becomes not merely transfer of knowledge, but transformation of community. The town hall had never held so many people. Every bench was filled, with additional residents standing along the walls and spilling out onto the porch. Emma stood calmly at the front, her documentation arranged on the table before her as Harold Whitman called the curriculum review to order, with visible discomfort at the unprecedented attendance. This was intended as a standard administrative procedure, he began, attempting to reassert control, not a public spectacle. Educational decisions affect the entire community, Mrs. Peterson called from the second row. We have a right to witness the process. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Whitman's jaw tightened as he recognized the futility of attempting to exclude observers at this point. Very well. We'll proceed with the formal review of Miss Hayes's probationary teaching appointment. He gestured to the board members seated at the table, Reverend Phillips looking uncomfortable, Dr. Hayes appearing resolute, and Robert Jensen watching with calm assessment. Before Whitman could continue, the door opened to admit a distinguished older woman in traveling clothes, silver-haired, straight-backed, and carrying herself with unmistakable academic authority. Dr. Elizabeth Foster had arrived, precisely as promised, her timing impeccable. I believe this matter concerns my former student, she stated clearly. As Professor William Hayes's colleague and Emma's mentor, I request permission to provide relevant context. Whitman's face darkened at this unexpected complication. This is a local matter, madam. Educational standards transcend geography. Sir, Dr. Foster countered smoothly, unless Pine Ridge Valley has seceded from established academic principles. Stifled laughter from the crowd revealed the effectiveness of her approach. Robert Jensen immediately stood. I move we hear Dr. Foster's testimony as relevant expert witness. Seconded, Dr. Hayes added promptly. Outmaneuvered, Whitman could only nod tight-lipped agreement as Dr. Foster moved to stand beside Emma, her presence lending immediate credibility. Now, Whitman said, attempting to regain initiative, there are serious concerns about both curriculum content and personal conduct. Perhaps we should begin with educational outcomes, Dr. Hayes interrupted firmly. The primary purpose of teaching is student learning, which Miss Hayes has documented comprehensively. He distributed copies of Emma's meticulous reports showing accelerated progress in reading, mathematics, and scientific understanding. Parents murmured appreciatively as they recognized their own children's achievements, detailed with empirical precision. These results are certainly interesting, Whitman acknowledged begrudgingly, but unconventional methods may produce temporary improvements at the expense of moral development and social propriety. An interesting claim, Dr. Foster interjected. In my 40 years of educational oversight, I've observed that intellectual integrity and moral development are inextricably linked. Perhaps you could specify which ethical principles Miss Hayes's teaching has undermined? The direct challenge forced Whitman to either make explicit accusations or abandon his insinuations. His hesitation revealed the weakness of his position. Agatha Cooper, seated prominently near the front, attempted to fill the gap. There are serious questions about Miss Hayes's personal conduct and associations that render her an inappropriate model for impressionable children. Emma maintained her composure, prepared to address these accusations directly. Before she could speak, however, an unexpected voice responded from the crowd. Mother, that's enough. George Cooper stood, his face flushed but determined. These insinuations without evidence damage our community's integrity more than they protect it. Agatha's face registered shock at this public rebellion from her son. George continued with growing confidence. Miss Hayes has demonstrated exemplary professional conduct while delivering educational outcomes that benefit this entire valley's economic future. A murmur of approval spread through the gathering. Emma noted Matthew at the back of the room, his expression revealing quiet pride in the community's emerging independent voice. The specific allegations, Whitman attempted to regain control, concern inappropriate meetings between Miss Hayes and certain community members, creating appearance of impropriety unsuitable for an educational leader. If you refer to curriculum consultations with Mr. Blackwood, Emma responded calmly, they occurred with full awareness of school committee members and focused exclusively on educational resources. Furthermore, Dr. Hayes added, I personally witnessed several such discussions, which demonstrated nothing but professional dedication to educational improvement. The systematic dismantling of Whitman's accusations continued as parent after parent rose to describe specific benefits their children had received. Mrs. Lawrence detailed her son's newfound enthusiasm for mathematics. Hours later, as sunset painted Thunder Mountain in shades of gold and purple, Emma stood with Matthew on the schoolhouse porch, Dr. Foster's presence nearby, providing necessary social propriety while allowing them a measure of privacy. What happens now? Emma asked, gazing toward the mountains that had witnessed her transformation from rejected mail-order bride to respected educational leader. Pine Ridge Valley changes, Matthew replied simply. What began as your individual struggle has awakened community consciousness about self-determination in all aspects of development. And us? The question emerged before Emma could reconsider its directness. Matthew turned to face her fully, his expression serious yet tender. That depends entirely on you, Emma. I recognized your spirit from our first meeting, too vital and independent for the constraints others attempted to impose. Whatever path you choose, I would walk beside you as equal, never before or behind. The declaration, though carefully phrased to acknowledge her independence, carried unmistakable deeper meaning. Emma considered how far she had traveled from the desperate young woman who had arrived seeking security through conventional marriage. The irony wasn't lost on her. In losing that predetermined path, she had found genuine connection based on mutual respect and shared purpose. I believe, she said carefully, that proper courtship conducted with appropriate community oversight might demonstrate that educational leadership and personal fulfillment aren't mutually exclusive. Matthew's smile transformed his serious features. I believe Dr. Foster would make an excellent chaperone for such a courtship. As the last light faded from Thunder Mountain, Emma Hayes contemplated the journey that had brought her to this moment. Rejected for being too wild by conventional standards, she had found not just acceptance, but appreciation from a man whose own spirit bridged worlds and recognized true value beyond social constraints. Pine Ridge Valley would never return to Harold Whitman's comfortable control. Education had awakened community consciousness, and awakened communities inevitably transform. Whatever challenges remained, they would face them together, not just Emma and Matthew, but an entire community discovering its collective voice and shared future. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.